Let me ask about the feeling of intelligence. So Dario said that Claude, any one model of Claude is not getting dumber.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a kind of popular thing online where people have this feeling like Claude might be getting dumber. And from my perspective, it's most likely fascinating. I'd love to understand it more, psychological, sociological effect. But you, as a person who talks to Claude a lot, can you empathize with the feeling that Claude is getting dumber?
Yeah, no, I think that is actually really interesting because I remember seeing this happen, like when people were flagging this on the internet, and it was really interesting because I knew that like at least in the cases I was looking at, it was like nothing has changed. Like it literally, it cannot. It is the same model with the same like same system prompt, same everything. I think when there are changes, then I'm like, it makes more sense. So like one example is there. You can have artifacts turned on or off on Claude.ai. And because this is like a system prompt change, I think it does mean that the behavior changes a little bit. And so I did flag this to people where I was like, if you love Claude's behavior and then artifacts was turned from like a thing you had to turn on to the default, just try turning it off and see if the issue you were facing was that change. But it was fascinating because, you sometimes see people indicate that there's like a regression when I'm like, there cannot, like I'm again, you should never be dismissive. And so you should always investigate because you're like, maybe something is wrong that you're not seeing. Maybe there was some change made, but then you look into it and you're like, it is just the same model doing the same thing. And I'm like, I think it's just that you got kind of unlucky with a few prompts or something. And it looked like it was getting much worse. And actually it was just, it was maybe just like luck.
I also think there is a real psychological effect where people the baseline increases and you start getting used to a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
All the times that Claude says something really smart, your sense of its intelligence grows in your mind, I think.
Yeah.
And then if you return back and you prompt in a similar way, not the same way, in a similar way, the concept it was okay with before, and it says something dumb, you're like, that negative experience really stands out. And I think I guess the things to remember here is that just the details of a prompt can have a lot of impact, right? There's a lot of variability in the result.
And you can get randomness is like the other thing. And just trying the prompt, 4 or 10 times, you might realize that actually like possibly, like 2 months ago, you tried it and it succeeded. But actually, if you'd tried it, it would have only succeeded half of the time. And now it only succeeds half of the time. That can also be an effect.
Do you feel pressure having to write the system prompt that a huge number of people are going to use?
This feels like an interesting psychological question. I feel like a lot of responsibility or something. I think that's, and you can't get these things perfect. So you can't you're like, it's going to be imperfect. You're going to have to iterate on it. I would say more responsibility than anything else. Though I think working in AI has taught me that I thrive a lot more under feelings of pressure and responsibility than I'm like, it's almost surprising that I went into academia for so long because I'm like I just feel like it's like the opposite. Things move fast and you have a lot of responsibility and I quite enjoy it for some reason.
I mean, it really is a huge amount of impact if you think about constitutional AI and writing a system prompt for something that's tending towards superintelligence.
Yeah.
And potentially is extremely useful to a very large number of people.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. It's something like if you do it well, like you're never going to get it perfect. But I think the thing that I really like is the idea that like when I'm trying to work on the system prompt, I'm like bashing on like thousands of prompts and I'm trying to like imagine what people are going to want to use Claude for and kind of, I guess like the whole thing that I'm trying to do is like improve their experience of it. And so maybe that's what feels good. I'm like, if it's not perfect, I'll improve it, we'll fix issues. But sometimes the thing that can happen is that you'll get feedback from people that's really positive about the model. And you'll see that something you did, like when I look at models now, I can often see exactly where like a trait or an issue is like coming from. And so when you see something that you did or you were like influential in, like making like, I don't know, making that difference or making someone have a nice interaction, it's like quite meaningful. But yeah, as the systems get more capable, this stuff gets more stressful because right now they're like not smart enough to pose any issues. But I think over time, it's going to feel like possibly bad stress over time.
How do you get like signal feedback about the human experience across thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, like what their pain points are, what feels good? Are you just using your own intuition as you talk to it to see what are the pain points?
I think I use that partly. And then obviously we have like, so people can send us feedback, both positive and negative, about things that the model has done. And then we can get a sense of like areas where it's like falling short. Internally, people like work with the models a lot and try to figure out areas where there are like gaps. And so I think it's this mix of interacting with it myself, seeing people internally interact with it, and then explicit feedback we get. And then I find it hard to know also, like, if people are on the internet and they say something about Claude and I see it, I'll also take that seriously.
I don't know. See, I'm torn about that. I'm going to ask you a question from Reddit. When will Claude stop trying to be my puritanical grandmother, imposing its moral worldview on me as a paying customer? And also, what is the psychology behind making Claude overly apologetic?
Yep.
So how would you address this very non-representative Reddit?
Yeah. I mean, some ways I'm pretty sympathetic in that, like they are in this difficult position where I think that they have to judge whether something's like actually, say, like risky or bad, and potentially harmful to you or anything like that. So they're having to like draw this line somewhere. And if they draw it too much in the direction of like, I'm going to, I'm kind of like imposing my ethical worldview on you, that seems bad. So in many ways, like I like to think that we have actually seen improvements on this across the board, which is kind of interesting because that kind of coincides with like, for example, like adding more of like character training. And I think my hypothesis was always like the good character isn't, again, one that's just like moralistic. It's one that is like it respects you and your autonomy and your ability to like choose what is good for you and what is right for you within limits. This is sometimes this concept of like corrigibility to the user. So just being willing to do anything that the user asks. And if the models were willing to do that, then they would be easily like misused. You're kind of just trusting. At that point, you're just saying the ethics of the model and what it does is completely the ethics of the user. And I think there's reasons to like not want that, especially as models become more powerful, because you're like, there might just be a small number of people who want to use models for really harmful things. But having models as they get smarter, like figure out where that line is, does seem important. And then, yeah, with the apologetic behavior, I don't like that. And I like it when Claude is a little bit more willing to like push back against people or just not apologize. Part of me is like, it often just feels kind of unnecessary. So I think those are things that are hopefully decreasing over time. And yeah, I think that if people say things on the internet, it doesn't mean that you should think that could be that like there's actually an issue that 99% of users are having that is totally not represented by that. But in a lot of ways, I'm just like attending to it and being like, is this right? Do I agree? Is it something we're already trying to address? That feels good to me.
Yeah, I wonder like what Claude can get away with in terms of, I feel like it would just be easier to be a little bit more mean. But like you can't afford to do that if you're talking to a million people.
Yeah.
Right. Like I wish, because I've met a lot of people in my life that sometimes, by the way, Scottish accent, if they have an accent, they can say some rude shit and get away with it. And they're just blunter. And maybe there's some great engineers, even leaders that are like just like blunt and they get to the point, and it's just a much more effective way of speaking somehow. But I guess when you're not super intelligent, you can't afford to do that. Or can have like a blunt mode?
Yeah, that seems like a thing that I could definitely encourage the model to do that. I think it's interesting because there's a lot of things in models that like, it's funny where there are some behaviors where you might not quite like the default, but then the thing I'll often say to people is, you don't realize how much you will hate it if I nudge it too much in the other direction. So you get this a little bit with like correction. The models accept correction from you, like probably a little bit too much right now. You can it'll push back if you say like, no, Paris isn't the capital of France. But really, like things that I think that the model's fairly confident in, you can still sometimes get it to retract by saying it's wrong. At the same time, if you train models to not do that, and then you are correct about a thing and you correct it and it pushes back against you and is like, no, you're wrong. It's hard to describe. Like, that's so much more annoying. So it's like a lot of little annoyances versus like one big annoyance. It's easy to think that like we often compare it with like the perfect. And then I'm like, remember, these models aren't perfect. And so if you nudge it in the other direction, you're changing the kind of errors it's going to make. And so think about which of the kinds of errors you like or don't like. So in cases like apologeticness, I don't want to nudge it too much in the direction of like almost like bluntness, because I imagine when it makes errors, it's going to make errors in the direction of being kind of like rude. Whereas at least with apologeticness, you're like, oh, okay, it's like a little bit, like I don't like it that much, but at the same time, it's not being like mean to people. And actually, like the time that you undeservedly have a model be kind of mean to you, you probably like that a lot less than you mildly dislike the apology. So it's like one of those things where I'm like, I do want it to get better, but also while remaining aware of the fact that there's errors on the other side that are possibly worse.
I think that matters very much in the personality of the human. I think there's a bunch of humans that just won't respect the model at all.
Yeah.
If it's super polite. And there's some humans that'll get very hurt if the model is mean.
Yep.
I wonder if there's a way to sort of adjust to the personality, even locale. There's just different people. Nothing against New York, but New York is a little rougher on the edges.
Yep.
Like they get to the point.
Yep.
And probably same with Eastern Europe. So anyway.
I think you could just tell the model, is my guess. Like for all of these things, I'm like, the solution is always just try telling the model to do it. And then sometimes it's just like I'm just like, oh, at the beginning of the conversation, I'd just throw in like, I don't know, I like you to be a New Yorker version of yourself and never apologize. And then I think Claude will be like, okie doke, I'll try. Or it'll be like, I apologize, I can't be a New Yorker type of myself, but hopefully it wouldn't do that.
When you say character training, what's incorporated into character training? Is that RLHF? Or what are we talking about?
It's more like constitutional AI. So it's kind of a variant of that pipeline. So I worked through like constructing character traits that the model should have. They can be kind of like shorter traits or they can be kind of richer descriptions. And then you get the model to generate queries that humans might give it that are relevant to that trait. Then it generates the responses and then it ranks the responses based on the character traits. So in that way, after the like generation of the queries, it's very much like it's similar to constitutional AI. It has some differences. So I quite like it because it's almost it's like Claude's training in its own character because it doesn't have any. It's like constitutional AI, but it's without any human data.
Humans should probably do that for themselves too, like defining in a Aristotelian sense, what does it mean to be a good person? Okay, cool.